Good morning. My name is Richard Wexler, and I want to invite you to episode 21 of our podcast, Caring in America. So, as I do with each episode, who am I and why am I doing this? So, roll the clock back about 18 years. I'm minding my own business in the software industry, married later. Two small kids, one 11 and one 7. And then in the summer of '05, my wife, who's working out of our home, the kids, we start getting phone calls. It turns out to be 4 phone calls, and we are now carrying on an unbelievable journey for all 4 of our parents. That journey lasted 14 years. Changed our lives, led to the formation of our company, Points of Life. We've been able to educate thousands of people about this little tiny word called care all over the country. Wanted to reach out to more people, and that's why I started the podcast. So, we've talked in different episodes about the different ways to care for people, whether that's in the home, with a family, friend, neighbor, whether that's in a community, etc. So today, we're going to bring an expert on to really talk about in-home care. What is it and what does it do? So, introducing her, I want to go through her bio. Her name is Mary Martinez. She is the owner and CEO of the Homestead franchise in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Mary has both a degree in sociology and a degree in gerontology. So, Homestead provides care for seniors in the community who need support such as personal care, errands, transportation, housekeeping, meal preparation, and more. And Mary's been doing this only a couple of years. I'm kidding. She's been doing this over 23 years. Are you there, Mary?
I'm here.
Welcome. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. We're having a beautiful day here in Albuquerque.
What's your temperature going to be like?
We're probably going to be mid 90s, mid to low 90s, cooling off a
Wow.
bit.
Is that normal for this time of year?
Yeah, actually it is. And then all of a sudden we're going to get a cold spell and it'll stay nice and cool for a few months.
Oh, wow. Wow. So, as we bring this subject up, kind of where I wanted to start, I want to get an idea of why your interest in gerontology and elder care. Can you talk about that for a few minutes?
It's so funny, but I feel like it's something I've done my whole life. Um, it started out when I was young. It seemed like all of my elderly neighbors always found me when they needed something. And I was always happy to oblige. I did things like mowing lawns, raking leaves, pulling weeds. A couple times I had the same neighbor get locked out of her house and they put me through the bathroom window to get to the front door and let her in.
Wow.
Um, but I just was always managing to end up watching out for my neighbors. And, when anytime I go anywhere, they always seem to find me. I'm not very tall, but in the grocery store, I'll be the person they ask to get the can off the top shelf. And so,
Interesting.
yeah, I'm good about that. And then I just have always had an interest in it. I had several incarnations before deciding to go back to school and study gerontology. I felt like that was a career path for me. Prior to that, I just had jobs, but I wanted a career that was going to be meaningful and really just allow me to help as many people as possible. And gerontology ended up being a program that New Mexico State had, so I jumped on that bandwagon as soon as I found out about it and got my degree 4 years later.
Very cool. I know this has also touched you personally through your grandmothers. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Both of my grandmothers lived in what were little tiny towns in Colorado, but now they're huge. Windsor and Loveland, Colorado. One grandmother was not very healthy. She did not take very good care of herself at all. She smoked a lot. She had diabetes that she really didn't manage very well, and she was kind of, my mom's side of the family isn't very big, so it seemed like she didn't get that many visitors compared to my other grandmother who lived in Windsor. Always had a house full. She was very fastidious. She watched her meds. She took care of herself. Total opposite. And I seemed to gravitate towards my other grandmother, and I would spend weeks with her during the summer. I would go right away, and she knew I was going to do this. I would get there and I'd go through the cabinets and I would throw away all the Twinkies and all the sugar and all the things that she wasn't supposed to have. And we'd go to the grocery store and we'd get all the healthy stuff. And then I'd go through her medications. I'd find meds that her neighbors decided she needed, or some of her meds weren't there because she decided her neighbors needed them. So I would sort everybody's meds out, get them back to them, and have a stern conversation with her about staying on top of her own medications and staying hydrated and doing
Wow.
healthier things for herself. And
Wow.
yeah, it was interesting because I enjoyed doing that, and being the nudgy little grandkid, she didn't argue with me, and it was fun to watch her, just kind of behave for a little while, at least while I was there.
So it sounds like, I mean, this really touched you from a young age and this kind of calling towards gerontology, which turned into work in the elder care field. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I feel like I've been on that trajectory my whole life, and all the other jobs I had kind of prepared me because of the skills I learned there to, once I started running my own business, I had a background in just about everything. So any challenge I was going to run into, I pretty much had the experience or some knowledge about it.
So let's talk, as I talked about a couple minutes ago. I mean, there's a few options for care. And I'm going to go back to this four-letter word that people hate, and I bring it up on every episode, and that word is plan. That we need to start reaching out to our loved ones. We need to understand what they want as they age. We need to understand where they want to live. I mean, you've probably heard this a million times in 23 years. I've heard it a lot in my 18 years. I'm going to die with my boots on at home. And that may be realistic for some people. It may not be realistic for others. Part of that planning, understanding what an elder loved one wants to do, is also understanding cost, which we'll get to a little bit later, whether it is in the home or whether it is in a community. Can you talk a little bit just about, well, first of all, what attracted you to home care? Then we'll talk more specifically what home care does.
Well, when I first came back to Albuquerque, I was on the opening teams of two different assisted livings when they started creating back in the mid 90s, the larger facilities and communities. I was on the opening team of one, and recognized then that not everybody can afford to move into a community, and give up their home and things like that. And not everybody wanted to, but when it was a good fit, it was a good fit. So I enjoyed being on those two opening teams, and I learned a lot about once people come in, yes, we had care staff in the building, but sometimes they needed a little bit more. So that's actually how I met the original owner of this franchise of Home Instead. If we had somebody who had dementia and they were really struggling to adapt to the new environment, I would reach out to Joe Sanders and say, "Hey, I need an overnight shift. I've got a wanderer. I've got somebody with dementia learning their new environment," and then they would have one-on-one care for that transition. And so that's how I first kind of had experience with non-medical home care, and stayed in touch with Joe because when I went to open the next community, same issue would happen in our Alzheimer's unit. People would struggle with adapting, or maybe you had somebody who was normally very isolated and didn't really want to learn the ropes and learn to socialize in the community. Having a companion that was just their person showing them around until they adapted. It was just really helpful. Or if somebody went to the hospital and came home and came back to the facility and needed one-on-one care for a little while, again, we would call home instead, and the caregivers would come and just be our point guard in those situations where the facility staff couldn't be there, 4 hours continuously, but a caregiver could. So that's how I learned about home instead. And then a couple years later, Joe, when I was leaving the industry of facilities assisted living, Joe asked me to come work for him. And that's how I got into the boots, being the boots on the ground for home care.
Very interesting, and I know, and it's kind of what you're talking about. It can really take a village sometimes to help an adult as they age based on their physical or mental situation. Something you brought up, and I'm not sure, I think I've talked about this on past episodes. I want to make sure people understand that mom or dad, grandparents, whatever it may go off to a beautiful community. But it sounds like in some situations, maybe there just isn't the amount of care or someone to sit with mom, dad, whomever it may be overnight. Is that something that's fairly common, something you see in the industry?
Absolutely. Even to this day, continuously, we still get calls from communities. And I can tell you, COVID really created challenges for all of us in the industry. So many people left the industry because they were afraid of that one on one exposure, potentially getting COVID. And quite a few came back, but quite a few did not. So everybody's understaffed. Including us, we have probably half the staff that we did before COVID. So we're down to 57 caregivers. But facilities, when they're short staffed, they're calling us and asking us to cover complete shifts, not just one on ones with residents, but actually being a shift member, a team member for an entire shift. So we're seeing those kind of challenges and shortages. But a lot of families will call us too and say, mom's just moved into this place and she's not really enjoying herself. Can we get somebody to come in a couple times just to help her learn the ropes? So we're doing both ends now. Is we're now doing staffing as well as those one-on-one care shifts.
Let's kind of get into the nitty gritty of home care. So, what is it? What do you guys do? Let's make up a young lady who's about 80 years of age. She's in her home and she needs home care. Tell me more about it.
Okay, so actually, I just did an intake the other day that would fit perfectly with that. Lovely lady, 84 years old, lives alone and has for quite some time. She only has one daughter who does not live in town. Daughter just came into town, and mom also has several pets. Came into town and saw that mom's really struggling to take care of the animals and herself, and appears to have lost some weight. And so, daughter's very concerned. Takes her to the doctor and finds out that she's kind of not been taking her meds and not eating very well. So that's the sort of thing that we encounter quite often is a family member. Most kids don't live near mom and dad anymore. Coming home and just thinking, oh my gosh, all these things are going wrong. So I come in, sit down, and talk with Betty and find out what's going on with her, how she's been feeling, and if she had help, what would that look like? What would be most helpful to her? Meet with her daughter as well, and just kind of discuss with them what we can do, be that second set of arms and legs for mom so she feels supported, and that conduit for daughter so she still feels like she's involved. And we can keep that communication open with daughter saying mom's doing better or mom needs a little more care. But it's just kind of being that adopted family member and filling in that missing piece. So, walking in the door the next week, we started shifts with Betty, made sure the dogs were getting walked and watered and the birds were fed, and that Betty was getting outside and getting some fresh air. Also, even if it's going for a car ride to the grocery store and helping her doing her grocery shopping, stand by so she can safely take a shower or a bath, and just being an engaging companion to her too, so she's not feeling so isolated. It can be as simple as that, all the way up to coming in when someone is now declined and are on hospice. We're another again set of arms and legs to assist in that process as well.
So we really haven't talked that much about, if at all, about hospice on our episodes as of yet. Something we'll be talking about down the line. But I want people to understand, as you just said, hospice can take place in someone's home.
Yes.
And then sometimes people don't realize normally the hospice company is not going to be there many, many hours with that individual. So, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but my assumption is that you folks are the ones that are still there taking care of that person. Is that correct?
Right. We're the hands-on, and how you mentioned the village earlier. Sometimes there's several agencies in there at the same time. It'd be us for the simple home care pieces, and sometimes we see that somebody could benefit from some physical therapy. Maybe they're not getting around very well, or their walker's not the right size, or they're using a cane when they should be using a walker. We're recognizing that there's more needed in that situation, and sometimes occupational therapy, physical therapy can be brought in, by reaching out to the doctor, and you see them regain their strength. So that's another partner we have in the community. And then sometimes that doesn't, maybe it works for a while, but then they start to decline. And so we maybe palliative care comes in, where it's just comfort measures and things before you're on, full blown hospice. But all of those things are things that can come in to your home. So there's not always a need to ever leave your home. You can stay there as long as you want to and are able to safely.
Interesting, and thank you for bringing up. People a lot of times don't understand the difference between in-home care that you're providing and also home health. And home health are those folks, the therapists that come in, whether it be occupational, physical, whatever it may be. And I want people to understand there's also a big difference in the way it's paid for, but I want people to understand exactly how those services are different. And we're talking in home care with you. I do have a question. So let's pretend again this 80-year-old that you're taking care of, maybe from the beginning of taking care of her, or maybe her health has declined a little bit. What happens from an in home care perspective as far as giving that individual medication? Is that something you do or don't do?
We, as non-medical, we can give her pills, but we're not able to give shots or put pain patches on. Those things are considered invasive. So those are things in our state. I don't know if that's every state, but we would not be allowed to do those. But regular medications we can definitely do.
So, if someone needs an insulin shot or whatever it may be, what would you recommend to them or the family? How would that be handled?
Well, a lot of times you can get the pre-measured that we can do hand over hand, and then they actually do the injection themselves. Or if it's a fluid that they have to take, again, hand over hand. But if it's an oral that they have to take, we can do that too. But we cannot be seen, or, it can't be seen as us administering medications. That's kind of the fine line in New Mexico.
Interesting. In New Mexico, and this again, this may be different per states. If you actually had a nurse employed and that nurse was out at this individual's home, could you give those shots or not?
It's still, because of the way we're licensed, I'm not licensed to do that. But I do have a nurse on staff. She oversees our veteran care program. So she does the supervisory visits and double checks their medications and things like
Sure.
that.
No,
That's a
that's
different
very
umbrella altogether. So I'm allowed to
sure.
do that because it's a VA contract. But again, in our state, it's a little wonky. So you have to learn the regs.
People may hear the terminology activities of daily living. So, can you kind of explain that a little bit more if people do hear that and normally what that entails?
So it's what you do to get through your day. So, like once you get up, take your shower or bath or whatever it is you do in the morning to get your day started, have your breakfast, do your housekeeping, laundry, maybe go for a walk, anything that you do normally to get through your day. Those are your activities of daily living. Making medications, you take your medications Do you take them with your meals, in between meals? All of those things are what we learn about a client so that we can help them keep that activity level, or maybe up it a little bit if they're needing to get moving a little bit more. But it's just what you do to get through your day.
Interesting. So, home instead, you can correct me if I'm wrong, one of the largest in-home care providers, I believe, worldwide. The last numbers I saw were around 1,200 offices. Am I
Right.
am I close?
No, that is correct.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about home instead.
Well, the interesting thing about it, and it's kind of cool. The original founders are my age, so we're all getting close to 60. But when they were a young couple, his grandmother, this is Paul and Lori Hogan, Paul's grandmother started to decline, and so the whole family, very large family, thank goodness for them, all took turns taking care of her. And sometimes if somebody had to miss a shift, they would all trade off with each other. But as a family, they all stepped in, and it kind of set off a little bit of a light bulb for Paul when he realized his mom has neighbors that don't have any family. What about them? And so he started kind of looking to the idea of creating a company that would hire people to go out and be that missing family member, in the form of a caregiver. So that's how Home Instead was born, and they were the first employees, so they were the first caregivers, and they brought in a lot of their family members to be staff when the company was growing, and to be the caregivers. They started bringing in friends, and it just kind of spread from there. And got the idea, if we can do this in Omaha, we can do this anywhere. So then it became a franchise. So Albuquerque was the 44th franchise purchase. So we were one of the early adopters here. And then it just kept going. And then again, went international. So the footprint and the map, the roadmap that they created was just, was perfect to create a template to go out in the community where people really didn't have help available or family available. We were the missing family.
Very interesting. So let me ask you, so there and our listeners out there, there's a family out there, adult children, aging mom, aging dad. We both know sometimes having a conversation with them can be challenging. What advice would you give those adult children? Maybe those adult children are 60, 70 years old, maybe the parents in their 80s or 90s, which is amazing, but that's what's happening these days. What advice would you give them for starting and having that conversation?
Well, in my family, I'm one of four kids, so I've lived this already. What I would start with is give each other grace. You all have different relationships with your mom and dad. Some of you are stronger than others, and so that strong person should I would recommend take the lead, but don't command everyone else. Just kind of bring them along and let them help at a level that works for them. For example, my brother didn't always get along very well with my mom, but he adored my dad. So anytime dad needed anything, that's when brother was called. Or if something needed to be repaired in the house, my brother would be called. I have a sister that wasn't in town at the time, so she would long distance make appointments or check in and things like that. And when she was in town, she'd clean house and do things like that. She'd give us the rest of us a break a little bit. And then when it came time to make choices about care, again, that's my expertise, but I didn't want to, I mean, I was still the sister, and that was a little awkward for me to come in and say, this is what needs to happen. I still had a conversation. How do you guys feel about this? What do you guys think about that? And it's important to hear what everybody thinks. It's important to hear how everybody feels. And also, again, to meet them where they are. You might not have the same bandwidth to jump in and take on that care role, but you're fine doing the grocery shopping. Just understand that about each other. But also include your parents in the conversation and ask them, what does this look like for you? How would you like to spend your last days? If it's in home, are we allowed to support you? What, have that difficult awkward conversation, because in the end, it benefits all of you to open that conversation and have a plan in place. Even if it's just baby steps at a time, at least acknowledge that a plan needs to happen.
That's that's wonderful advice. Do you find, I don't, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but do you find a lot of your clients have adult kids that do not live in the area? Is that correct or not?
Yeah, actually, quite a few. And that's, a lot of times that's why we're there. The kids are the ones who will say, "Can you guys come and set up a schedule where you're there, 3 or 4 times a week?" And it's a lot of it is so that they can check in with us and get the real story. Because mom will say, "Oh, I'm fine, everything's great," but when we walk in the door, the house is a mess. The dogs have fleas. It's, all these things that could be going wrong, but mom tells the kids everything's fine. She doesn't want to worry them, but she's also embarrassed. Not so embarrassed in front of us, because we're not her family, and it's easier for us to be that solution for her. And so we get things back up to par for mom and report back to the kids so that they can have some peace and know they can't be here, but we can, and we'll be their eyes and their ears, and let them know mom's doing better, or we made an appointment for mom because her blood pressure has been wonky. So we're in that role as maybe, just kind of the go between the family and mom or dad.
Very excellent information. Again, folks out there that are listening, I mean, this can be a pretty tough conversation and so on. No, I appreciate that, Mary. Um, there obviously are a lot of home care companies in most cities and towns around the country. So, what separates you from the others? If people are looking for an in home care company where mom or dad may live, is there something they should be listening for or looking for?
What I would recommend is definitely ask around friends and family that maybe have used agencies. If mom is in the hospital or rehab and going home, and they're suggesting that she go home with care, a lot of them keep tabs on who's doing a great job out in the community. And they'll tell you who to go with rather than who not to go with. And so reputation is important. Ask around, ask at senior centers, ask at your doctor's office, anywhere where you're going to have exposure to people that have had home care. We do a lot of outreach in the community, just educating people on the importance of planning ahead, but also letting them know what to look for at what level of care. Because sometimes they don't know about non medical home care, and they right away call a home health agency, which is not what they need yet. And it saves them some time to start in the right place. But check ratings in the community. Go on Yelp and Google. I don't Better Business Bureau. Any healthcare organizations. There's a few in Albuquerque that we're members of, and you can kind of look at people's longevity in the community and what their reputation is.
Great information. Couple financial questions. So let's make up a scenario. A caregiver for an in home care company, let's talk about you, goes into a home taking care of mom. Somehow that caregiver gets injured. How are you guys set up from an insurance perspective? Because our listeners out there may wonder about that.
Well, and again, that's why it's good to go with an agency versus a private caregiver, because if it's a private caregiver, you would be liable for that injury. As a company, I carry liability insurance, and we have had injuries. So it's covered by my insurance and workman's comp. So the caregiver does get the care that they need, and they follow up with us until they're well enough to go back to work if they decide they want to. And so it's there is no issue with the families. They're not out of pocket for anything at all. And then we have backup caregivers. So if their caregiver's off because they're injured, we have another caregiver we could send in their place. So we have fill-ins.
Very interesting. Thank you. And then as we kind of wrap this up, the last topic is cost. So in your area, what's the average hourly cost?
The average here, and it's, we don't call ourselves competition, we call ourselves co-opetition, because we refer back and forth to each other. We discuss pricing and pay rates and things like that, so that we don't have anybody raising the bar too high and outpricing us. For New Mexico's not, it's like the second poorest state in the country. So we know that finances are important, and especially now people are watching their pennies even more. I would say the average per hour now is around $34 an hour. We're on the lower end of that. We're between 30 and 32. But if you're planning on it, I look into what your savings are like, the value of your home. And if you're under the age of 72, I would recommend looking at long-term care insurance. We've got several clients who use that, and they're just so happy they got those policies because it pays for their care. Otherwise, you've got to figure out what your source is to pay for that. And most people have gone to minimums. If you did 12 hours a week at $34 in a month, what does that look like? In a year, what does that look like? So start planning your budget.
Again, excellent advice. When we go back to that four-letter word plan, folks, that's why I talk about that a lot. I mean, if we could wipe all the costs out, yeah, we'd love to do it, but it doesn't work that way. So you need to understand, especially if you're starting to see changes in your older loved one, whether it be mentally, whether it be physically, whether it be a combination of both. Uh, the earlier the better this conversation takes place, looking at finances, trying to get an understanding of how any care will be paid for. So as we go to wrap this up, Mary, and again, I thank you. This has been fantastic information. If people want to reach out to you, there are phone numbers, there a website, what can you give them?
I would say, because we answer our phone 24/7, and it's always open, answered by a staff member. We don't go to a call service after hours. You can call our main number, which is 505-884-0353. And again, we answer that 24/7.
That's fantastic. So, folks, I emphasize this on every episode. If you have a story you would like to talk about and share via our podcast, please reach out to me. I'm about to give you an email. If you're a professional out there like Mary and you want to share your expertise, maybe you're a professional sharing your expertise and talking about a story with a client or a patient, again, please reach out. That email, do you have a pen, folks, is eldered2023 at gmail.com. ELDERED2023 at gmail.com. So I want to thank Mary again. A lot of great information. Hopefully, you know a little bit more about in home care and what they do. So, thank you, Mary.
You're welcome. I was happy to be here.
So, as we say goodbye, as I say every time, folks, until we talk again, have an awesome day. Bye bye.